The coldest man in the northern kingdom stood alone in a ballroom built for 300 souls, and not a single person dared approach him. Duke Adrian Vale had perfected the art of existing without living, his face a mask of such practiced indifference that even his own reflection had begun to look like a stranger. Tonight, surrounded by glittering nobles who whispered behind jeweled fans, he would meet the one woman foolish enough to laugh at his carefully constructed emptiness. And that single moment of unexpected warmth would crack open something he had spent 15 years trying to bury. What happens when a man who has forgotten how to feel discovers that loneliness is not strength, but the slowest form of suicide? Stay with me, because this is the night everything changes. The marble floors of Blackthorn Castle gleamed like frozen lakes under the chandelier light, each crystal prism throwing fractured rainbows across walls that had witnessed generations of Vale family secrets. Adrian stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, a glass of untouched wine in his hand, watching the annual winter gala unfold with the detached interest of a man observing insects under glass. He was 32 years old and already felt ancient. Lord Pemberton approached with his usual obsequious smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. Sweat beaded on the man's upper lip despite the December chill that crept through the castle's stone bones. "You have outdone yourself this year, Your Grace. The decorations are simply magnificent." Adrian's gaze remained fixed on the crowd. "I hired someone. They did their job." Pemberton laughed, that nervous twitter that Adrian had learned to recognize as the sound of discomfort masquerading as mirth. Of course. Still, your attention to detail is remarkable, just like your father, God rest his soul." Something flickered behind Adrian's eyes, quick as lightning, gone just as fast. "Do not compare me to my father." The temperature in their immediate vicinity seemed to drop. Pemberton's smile froze, then cracked. No, of course not, Your Grace. I simply meant that your dedication to excellence is admirable." Adrian finally turned to look at him, and Pemberton took an involuntary step backward. The Duke's eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and unforgiving, set in a face that might have been handsome if it ever relaxed into anything resembling human emotion. "Is there something you actually need, Pemberton, or are you just filling the air with noise?" "I merely wanted to pay my respects, Your Grace. Consider them paid." "You may go." Pemberton fled, and Adrian returned to his observation post, feeling nothing. The problem he had discovered over the years was not that he felt too much. It was that he had systematically dismantled his own capacity to feel anything at all. His younger sister Eliza materialized at his elbow, resplendent in emerald silk that made her red hair look like flames. She was the only person in the castle who still dared stand close to him. "You are doing it again," she said quietly. "Doing what?" "Being a statue. A very expensive, very intimidating statue that happens to be breathing." Adrian took a sip of wine he did not taste. "I am hosting. That is what you wanted." "I wanted you to rejoin the world of the living," Eliza said. "There is a difference between hosting an event and actually participating in one." She paused, studying his profile. "When was the last time you laughed, Adrian?" He did not answer. "When was the last time you felt anything?" "I feel plenty." "Name one emotion you have experienced in the past month that was not anger or indifference." Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Around them, the gala spun on in its orchestrated perfection, musicians playing approved pieces, nobles exchanging approved pleasantries, everyone performing their roles in the elaborate theater of high society. "That is what I thought," Eliza said softly. "You are not living, Adrian. You are just existing very precisely. Is there a point to this conversation?" "Yes." Her hand touched his arm, the warmth of it almost startling. "I miss my brother, the real one. The one who used to laugh at terrible jokes and sneak pastries from the kitchen and actually cared about things beyond duty and reputation. That person does not exist anymore. Because you killed him or because you are too afraid to let him exist?" Before Adrian could respond, a commotion erupted near the eastern entrance. Raised voices, the kind that did not belong at a carefully orchestrated aristocratic gathering. His head turned with the predatory focus of a wolf scenting prey. A young woman in a simple dark dress was arguing with his head of security, a mountain of a man named Garrett, who looked supremely uncomfortable trying to physically manage someone who barely reached his shoulder. I am telling you, I have every right to be here, the woman was saying, her voice carrying across the ballroom with zero regard for decorum. That painting was my mother's, and I am taking it back. Adrian moved, cutting through the crowd with the unconscious authority of someone who had never had to ask permission for anything. Nobles parted before him like water before a ship's bow. What is the meaning of this? His voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. Garrett looked relieved. Your Grace, this woman was found attempting to remove one of the paintings from the West Gallery. I was just escorting her out. Adrian's gaze shifted to the intruder, prepared to dismiss her with the same cold efficiency he applied to all interruptions. And then she looked directly at him. No fear, no deference, just a fierce, blazing defiance that hit him like a physical blow. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that was coming undone, and eyes the color of honey catching sunlight. Her dress was well made but old, the kind of careful mending that spoke of pride fighting against poverty. Smudges of what looked like paint marked her fingers. That painting, she said, pointing toward the West Gallery, was stolen from my family 3 years ago. I have documentation. I have my mother's signature on the back, and I have every right to reclaim what is mine. You broke into my home. I walked through an unlocked servant's entrance during a party that has half the kingdom in attendance. That is not breaking in. That is just good timing. Someone in the crowd gasped. No one spoke to Duke Vale that way. No one. Adrian felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Irritation, certainly, but also something else, something that felt almost like interest. And you thought you would simply take what you claim is yours and walk out? I thought I would try. Her chin lifted. I have been trying to reach you through official channels for 8 months. You do not respond to letters. You do not grant audiences to people like me. So yes, I decided to take matters into my own hands. People like you. Artists. Commoners. People without titles or political leverage. She took a step closer, which made Garrett tense, but Adrian held up a hand. We exist to you people the same way furniture exists. Useful when you need us, invisible when you do not. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 300 nobles held their collective breath, waiting to see how the infamous Duke Vale would crush this impertinent intruder. Adrian studied her for a long moment. What is your name? Clara. Clara Whitmore. And this painting you claim was stolen. What makes you so certain it is yours? Because I watched my mother paint it. She tapped her temple. I know every brushstroke. I know where she mixed too much cadmium yellow in the sky because she was laughing at something my father said. I know where her hand cramped and the line wavered near the trees. That painting is not just mine by law. It is mine by memory. Something in the way she said it, the fierce protectiveness wrapped around grief, made Adrian pause. He recognized that tone. He had used it himself once, in another life, before he had learned to feel nothing. Show me, he said. What? Show me this painting you are willing to commit trespassing for. Clara blinked, clearly not expecting this turn. You want me to show you? Would I have said so otherwise? She hesitated, then nodded sharply. Fine. Follow me. As she turned and walked toward the West Gallery, Adrian followed, aware that the entire ballroom was now watching this bizarre procession. Eliza caught his eye, her expression somewhere between shocked and delighted. The West Gallery was quieter, lined with portraits and landscapes that Adrian had acquired over the years. Not because he cared about art, but because owning beautiful things was what dukes did. Clara stopped in front of a landscape, a small piece showing a forest path dappled with autumn light. It was lovely in an understated way, the kind of painting that did not demand attention but rewarded it. There, she said quietly. Her voice had changed, softened. That is my mother's work. Adrian moved closer, studying the piece. He had purchased it at an estate sale 3 years ago, along with several dozen other items. He barely remembered acquiring it. How did it come to be sold? After my mother died and my father fell into debt trying to pay for her medical care, he sold everything we owned before he... Clara's voice caught. Before he died as well. Most of it went to legitimate buyers, but this piece was stolen by the estate liquidator before the sale. He sold it privately and kept the money. And you can prove this? She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded letter, the paper worn soft from repeated handling. This is the bill of sale from the legitimate auction house. This painting is not listed, and if you remove it from the frame and check the back of the canvas, you will find my mother's signature. Lydia Whitmore. She always signed her work on the back because she said the front belonged to the world, but the back belonged to us. Adrian gestured to Garrett, who carefully removed the painting from the wall and turned it over. There, in faded ink, was the signature, Lydia Whitmore, and below it in smaller script, for Clara, who sees the light in everything. The gallery was very quiet. Adrian looked at the young woman beside him, really looked at her for the first time. She was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks, but her posture was straight and her gaze was fierce. "You could have written to me," he said. "Explain the situation. I did. 27 letters over 8 months. You never responded. I receive many letters, and I'm sure they are all carefully filed away by people who decide what is important enough for your attention." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing paint. "People like me do not make the cut." Adrian felt something unfamiliar happening. The carefully constructed walls he had built around himself, the ones that kept everything at a safe distance, were developing hairline fractures. He reached out and took the painting from Garrett, turning it so Clara could see the image. "Tell me about it." "What?" "Tell me why this particular piece matters so much." Clara looked at him as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "This was the path behind our cottage. My mother painted it the autumn before she got sick. I was sitting behind her reading poetry aloud while she worked. She said that was her favorite way to paint, with my voice in her ears. She said it made the colors brighter somehow." Clara's finger traced the line of the path without touching the canvas. "Every time I look at this painting, I can hear my own voice reading Keats. I can smell the wood smoke from our neighbor's chimney. I can feel my mother's happiness radiating off the canvas like heat." She looked up at him, and Adrian saw something in her eyes that he had not seen in anyone's eyes for years. She was not looking at Duke Vale, the cold northern lord. She was looking at Adrian, the human being, and expecting him to understand. "After they died, I had nothing left of them except memories," she said quietly. "And this painting, it was the last thing my mother created while she was still herself, before the illness took her mind. When it was stolen, it felt like losing her all over again." The gallery was completely silent except for the distant sound of the orchestra still playing in the ballroom. Adrian heard himself say something he had not planned to say. "Take it." Clara's eyes widened. "What?" "The painting is yours. Take it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She looked at the canvas, then back at him, suspicious. "What is the catch?" "There is no catch. Rich men always have a catch. I am giving you back something that belonged to your family. That is not a catch. That is just the right thing to do." Clara studied him for a long moment, and Adrian had the disquieting sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. Then she did something completely unexpected. She laughed. It was not a polite society laugh or a nervous titter. It was a real laugh, full-throated and genuine, the kind that came from someplace true. "What is funny?" Adrian asked, confused. "You," she said, shaking her head. "The entire kingdom is terrified of you. They say Duke Vale has ice water in his veins. They say you once dismissed a man from your service because he smiled too much. They say you are incapable of human feeling. I have heard the rumors. And yet here you are, giving back a stolen painting to a complete stranger and looking completely baffled that I find it amusing." Clara's smile softened. "You are not nearly as cold as you pretend to be, Your Grace." For the first time in 15 years, Adrian Vale felt his own face do something unexpected. He smiled. It was small and rusty and probably looked more like a grimace, but it was real. And Clara Whitmore, who had sneaked into a duke's castle and demanded justice with nothing but courage and grief, smiled back. "That is better," she said. "You should do that more often." "Smile? Be human." She carefully took the painting from his hands, cradling it like a child. "Thank you, Your Grace. This means more than you can possibly know." "Adrian." "What?" "My name is Adrian. When it is just us, you can use my name." Clara tilted her head, studying him with those honey-colored eyes. "All right then. Thank you, Adrian." She turned to leave, and Adrian felt something he had not felt in years. Panic. Not the cold tactical panic of military campaigns or political maneuvering, but the simple human panic of not wanting someone to disappear. Wait, he heard himself say. Clara stopped, turned back. How will you get home? It is late and the roads are not safe. I walked here. I will walk back. From where? The old artist quarter, near the river docks. That was nearly 5 miles through some of the roughest neighborhoods in the northern district. That is not acceptable. I will have my carriage take you. I do not need charity. It is not charity. It is basic human decency, which apparently is so rare that you mistake it for charity. Adrian surprised himself by feeling a flash of anger. Do you have any idea what happens to young women walking alone through the dock district at midnight? I have been taking care of myself for 3 years now. I think I can manage a walk. You are carrying a valuable painting. It is only valuable to me, which makes you even more of a target. Adrian stepped closer, and Clara's eyes widened slightly. I am trying to help you. Why? We are strangers. Because... Adrian stopped, caught off guard by the question. He did not know why. He just knew that the thought of her walking alone through dark streets made something in his chest constrict, because it is the right thing to do. Clara searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, thank you. Garrett was dispatched to arrange the carriage, leaving Adrian and Clara alone in the gallery. The sounds of the party filtered in from the ballroom, but in this small space, it felt like they existed in a separate world. Can I ask you something? Clara said. You seem to be doing it regardless. That got another small smile. Why did you really give me the painting back? You could have demanded proof, made me go through legal channels, made it as difficult as possible, but you just gave it to me. Adrian was silent for a moment, trying to articulate something he did not fully understand himself. I knew someone once who lost everything that mattered. I watched what that loss did to them, how it hollowed them out from the inside until there was nothing left but echoes. Your father? No. Adrian's voice went flat. My father never cared about anything except power and legacy. He died exactly as he lived, with a heart full of ambition and nothing else. Then who? Me, Adrian said quietly. I am talking about me. Clara's expression shifted, softness replacing the defensive edge. I am sorry. Do not be. It was a choice. I chose to stop caring because caring hurt too much. And has it worked? Has what worked? Turning yourself into ice. Has it made the pain go away? Adrian met her gaze, and for a moment he considered lying, considered falling back on the armor he had so carefully constructed. But something about the way she looked at him, with honesty instead of fear, made him tell the truth. No, it has not. It has just made me numb, which turns out to be its own kind of agony. Then maybe you should try something else. Such as feeling things, even if it hurts, even if it scares you. She shifted the painting in her arms. My mother used to say that pain is just proof you're still alive. The day you stop hurting is the day you have given up. Your mother sounds like she was wise. She was. Clara's smile was sad and warm at the same time. She was also completely impossible and ridiculously stubborn, and laughed at inappropriate times. I miss her every single day. Garrett returned to announce the carriage was ready. Clara thanked him, then turned back to Adrian. Will I see you again? She asked, and there was something in her voice that made his heart do a strange, stuttering thing. Do you want to? I do not know yet. She tilted her head. You are either going to turn out to be genuinely decent under all that ice, or you are going to disappoint me spectacularly. Either way, I am curious. And with that, she walked away, the painting clutched to her chest, leaving Adrian standing alone in a gallery full of beautiful things that suddenly seemed utterly meaningless. He returned to the ballroom in a daze. The party continued around him, the same meaningless conversations and political maneuvering, but everything felt different. He felt different. Eliza found him again, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Who was that? No one. Someone. Adrian. Who was that? A woman who sneaked into my party to steal back a painting that belonged to her family. And you let her take it? It was hers. Since when do you care about things like that? Adrian turned to look at his sister, and whatever she saw in his face made her gasp. Adrian, are you all right? You look… What? Cold, distant, inhuman? No, Eliza's voice was soft. You look alive. Adrian did not respond. He could not, because his sister was right. For the first time in 15 years, he felt something other than the endless gray nothing that had become his default state. He felt curious. He felt concerned. He felt something that might have been the beginning of hope, fragile as first ice on a winter pond. That night, after the last guests had departed and the servants had begun the work of dismantling the elaborate decorations, Adrian stood in his private study and did something he had not done in years. He pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a letter. Not a formal correspondence or political document, but a simple note. Miss Whitmore, he wrote, then paused, staring at the words. They looked wrong, too formal for what he wanted to say. He started again. Clara, better. I find myself wondering whether you made it home safely. I am told this is what normal people do after parting ways with someone new. They wonder. They care about outcomes. I am realizing I have forgotten how to do this. I would like to learn again. If you have other paintings, I would be interested in seeing your work. Not as a duke acquiring objects, but as someone who would like to understand what you see when you look at the world. Adrian. He sealed the letter before he could second-guess himself and left it with instructions for delivery first thing in the morning. Then he went to bed and dreamed for the first time in years. He dreamed of forest paths dappled with autumn light, and a voice reading poetry, and the sound of genuine laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for far too long. 3 days passed with no response. Adrian found himself checking the morning mail with an anxiety he had not felt since childhood. Each day that passed without a reply, the cold numbness began creeping back in, whispering that he had been foolish to hope for anything different. On the fourth day, a small package arrived. Inside was a sketch, done in charcoal on cheap paper. It showed a man standing alone in a ballroom, surrounded by people but completely isolated, his face a careful mask of indifference. But in the corner of the sketch, barely visible, was the same man's reflection in a window, and in that reflection, his face showed what the mask was hiding. Loneliness, exhaustion, a desperate, aching need for connection. Below the sketch, in flowing script, Clara had written, "This is what I saw when I looked at you." And below that, "My studio is at 47 River Street. If you truly want to learn how to feel again, come find me. No formal address, no title. Just an invitation from one human being to another." Adrian stared at the sketch for nearly an hour, memorizing every line, every shadow. She had seen him, really seen him, past the title and the reputation and the carefully constructed walls. And instead of running away, she had invited him closer. He found himself walking to his wardrobe, pulling out clothes he had not worn in years. Simple things, without family crests or ducal insignia. Then he stopped himself. What was he doing? Dukes did not visit artists in the dock district. They did not chase after commoners who mocked them to their faces. They maintained appropriate distance and propriety and never, ever allowed themselves to be vulnerable. Adrian looked at himself in the mirror and saw exactly what Clara had drawn. A man hiding behind a mask, slowly suffocating under the weight of his own isolation. He thought about his father, who had died surrounded by wealth and power and absolutely nothing that mattered. He thought about the last 15 years, moving through life like a ghost, never touching anything, never letting anything touch him. He thought about Clara's laugh and her fierce eyes, and the way she had looked at him like he was worth seeing. And then Duke Adrian Vale did something he had not done in 15 years. He chose to feel. He walked out of Blackthorn Castle without guards or carriages or any of the trappings of his title. He walked through the winter streets as snow began to fall, heading toward the river district and a small studio where a woman who was not afraid of him was waiting. When he arrived at number 47, he stood outside for a long moment, his hand raised to knock. Everything in his training, his upbringing, his carefully constructed identity told him to turn around, to go back to the safety of emotional numbness and aristocratic distance. But then he heard it. From inside the studio, floating through the thin walls, someone was singing, off-key and completely unself-conscious, singing while they worked. Clara's voice, the same one that had read poetry to her mother while she painted. And Adrian realized that somewhere in the last 4 days, without meaning to, he had made a choice. Not the safe choice or the proper choice or the choice that would protect him from ever being hurt again. He had chosen her. He knocked. The singing stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and Clara stood there, paint smeared across her nose, wearing an ancient smock covered in rainbow stains, looking at him with surprise and something else, something that might have been hope. "You came," she said. "I came." "Why?" "Because—" Adrian stopped, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. "Because you saw me, the real me, and you did not run." Clara stepped back, opening the door wider. "Then you should probably come in. Fair warning, though, I am a mess. My studio is chaos, and I'm going to ask you uncomfortable questions." "That sounds terrifying." "Good." She smiled, that fierce, warm smile that had haunted him for 4 days. "That means you are feeling something." And as Adrian stepped across the threshold into her cramped, cluttered, wonderfully alive studio, he felt the last of his carefully constructed armor begin to crack. The Duke who forgot how to feel was starting to remember. And it was absolutely terrifying, and absolutely necessary, and he could not wait to see where it led. The studio smelled like linseed oil and turpentine and something else Adrian could not identify at first. Then he realized it was life, the scent of a space where someone actually existed instead of just occupying air. Clara moved through the cramped room with unconscious grace, shifting canvases and clearing a chair that had been buried under sketches. Everything was chaos, but it was organized chaos, the kind that came from a mind that knew exactly where things were, even when they looked lost. "Sit," she said, not looking at him. "I need to finish this section before the light changes." Adrian sat, feeling oddly out of place in his plain clothes. Without the armor of his title, he was just a man in a stranger's studio, watching a woman work. Clara was painting something new, her brush moving in quick, decisive strokes across the canvas. He could not see what it was from his angle, only her face, completely absorbed in the work. She had forgotten about him entirely. It was the most peaceful he had felt in years. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Time moved differently here, untethered from schedules and obligations and the endless performance of aristocratic duty. Clara worked, and Adrian watched, and neither of them spoke. Finally, she set down her brush and turned to face him, wiping her hands on a rag that might have once been white. "You are still here. Did you expect me to leave? I expected you to get bored. Rich men do not have much patience for silence. I am not most rich men." "No." Clara studied him with that unsettling directness. "You are not. Which is why you are either going to be very interesting or very disappointing. I have not decided which yet." "Fair enough." She moved to a small stove in the corner and put a kettle on to boil. "Tea?" "Please." "Sugar? Milk?" "I should warn you, I only have the cheap stuff." "Black is fine." She made the tea in mismatched cups, handing him one that had a chip in the rim. They sat across from each other, a paint-stained table between them, and Adrian felt something shift in his chest, something loosening. "Why did you really come here?" Clara asked. "You invited me." "That is not an answer." Adrian looked down at his tea, watching steam curl up from the surface. "I have spent 15 years building walls, making sure nothing and no one could get close enough to hurt me. It worked. I am invulnerable." He looked up at her. "I am also completely alone. And you think I can fix that?" "I think you are the first person in 15 years who has looked at me and seen an actual human being instead of a title or a threat or an opportunity. That is a lot of pressure to put on a stranger." "I know." Adrian set down his cup. "If you want me to leave, I will leave. No obligations, no expectations." Claire was quiet for a long moment, her honey-colored eyes searching his face for something he could not name. Then she shook her head slowly. "I do not want you to leave, but I need you to understand something." She leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "I am not going to be your project. I am not going to be the poor artist you fix to make yourself feel better about all that wealth and power. I am not interested in being saved." "Good," Adrian said, "because I am not interested in saving anyone. I am barely managing to save myself." "Then what do you want?" "Honestly, I do not know yet." Adrian surprised himself with the truth. "I just know that when I am around you, something in me wakes up, something I thought was dead." Clara sat back, her expression unreadable. "That is either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me or the best line I have ever heard. It is not a line. Prove it. How? Come back tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Show me that this is not just some rich man's whim. Show me you are serious about learning to feel again. Adrian met her gaze. And if I do, then maybe I will teach you. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian returned to the studio on River Street every day. At first, the servants at Blackthorn Castle were confused, then concerned, then quietly scandalized. The Duke was keeping regular hours in the dock district, and no one knew why. Eliza confronted him on the 8th day. "You're going to see her, are you not? The woman from the party." Adrian was changing out of his formal clothes, preparing for another visit. "Her name is Clara. I know what her name is. The entire household staff knows what her name is. They also know you have been disappearing every afternoon for over a week. And nothing." Eliza's face softened. "I think it is wonderful." "You do?" "Adrian, I have watched you slowly turn into a ghost for 15 years. If this woman is bringing you back to life, then I do not care if she is a duchess or a street sweeper." She sat on his bed, her expression serious. "But you need to be careful." "Of what?" "Of yourself. When you finally let yourself feel again after all this time, it is going to be overwhelming. Do not drown her in it. I am not going to drown anyone. You are a veil. We do everything in extremes. When we love, we consume. It is in our blood. I am not father. No. But you are more like him than you want to admit." Eliza stood, moving to the door. "Just remember that caring about someone means considering what they need, not just what you want." After she left, Adrian stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time. Was she right? Was he capable of caring about someone without trying to own them? He did not know, but he was willing to find out. At the studio, Clara was teaching him to see, not in the literal sense, but in the way artists saw, how light moved across surfaces, how colors shifted depending on time of day, how shadows told stories of their own. "Most people look in the world and see objects," she said, guiding his hand across a blank canvas with a piece of charcoal. "Artists see relationships, how things connect, how they affect each other." Adrian was terrible at it. His lines were stiff and lifeless, lacking any sense of flow or grace. But Clara was patient, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, smell the paint in her hair. "You are thinking too much," she said. "Stop trying to control it. Just let your hand move. I do not know how to not control things. I know. That is your whole problem." She placed her hand over his, guiding the charcoal in a long, sweeping line. Her fingers were strong from years of holding brushes, calloused and paint-stained and beautiful. "Feel that? That is flow. That is letting go." Adrian felt it, and he felt something else. The warmth of her hand on his, the subtle shift of her body as she moved, the way her breath caught slightly when their faces got too close. He turned his head, and suddenly they were inches apart, her eyes wide and startled. "Clara," he said quietly. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not what? Do not look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I am the only thing in the world that matters." "You are," Adrian said, and meant it. Clara pulled back, putting distance between them. "This is why I told you to be careful. You go from completely numb to completely overwhelming in about 3 seconds. I do not mean to overwhelm you, I know, but you need to understand something." She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that made Adrian's chest ache. "I have been on my own for 3 years. I have learned to survive without anyone. I do not need to be swept off my feet by some duke who is having an emotional awakening. Is that what you think this is? A phase? I do not know what this is." Clara's voice rose slightly. "All I know is that 3 weeks ago, you were a stranger. Now you're here every day looking at me like I hung the moon, and it is terrifying. Why? Because people leave. They die, or they disappoint you, or they wake up one day and realize they made a mistake. And I have already lost everyone I loved. I cannot do it again." The raw pain in her voice hit Adrian like a physical blow. He understood suddenly that Clara's defenses were not about him. They were about survival. "I cannot promise you I will not disappoint you," he said quietly. "I am still learning how to be human again. I am going to make mistakes, but I can promise you that I am not going anywhere." "You cannot promise that." "Yes, I can, because for the first time in 15 years, I have found something worth staying for." Clara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You are making this very difficult. Good. You have been making it difficult since the moment you laughed at me in my own ballroom. That got a small, reluctant smile. You deserve to be laughed at. You were being ridiculous. I am aware. They stood in silence, the air between them charged with everything unsaid. Then Clara sighed, rubbing her face with paint-stained hands. Fine. But we are doing this slowly. No grand gestures, no overwhelming declarations. Just two people getting to know each other. I can do slow. Can you? I will learn. Over the following weeks, Adrian kept his word. He came to the studio every day, but he let Clara set the pace. They talked while she worked, conversations that ranged from art to philosophy to their childhoods. Adrian learned that Clara had grown up happy despite having very little, that her parents had loved each other fiercely and taught her to see beauty in everything, that she had learned to paint because her mother needed an assistant and could not afford to hire one. Clara learned that Adrian's childhood had been the opposite, wealthy beyond measure but emotionally barren. His father had been a tyrant who believed love was weakness, and his mother had died when he was 8, leaving him to be raised by a man who saw children as investments rather than people. No wonder you learned to freeze yourself, Clara said one afternoon. You were taught that feeling anything was dangerous. It was dangerous. In my father's house, emotion was a weapon he used against you. He sounds like a monster. He was. Adrian's voice was flat. When he died, I felt nothing. Not grief, not relief, just emptiness. And I realized I had become exactly like him. No, Clara said firmly. Monsters do not know they are monsters. The fact that you recognize what you became means you can still change. Can I? You are already changing. The man I met at the party would never sit in a cramped studio drinking cheap tea and talking about his childhood. That man was not really living. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. Neither was I. Not really. We were both just surviving. And now? Now we are trying something different. Her hand in his felt like an anchor, keeping him tethered to the world of the living. Adrian looked down at their joined fingers, paint-stained and scarred and real, and felt something crack open in his chest. He was falling for her. Had already fallen, if he was honest with himself. And it was absolutely terrifying because he had no idea how to do this without destroying it. The problem came when the aristocratic world caught up with Adrian's new life. Lord Pemberton arrived at Blackthorn Castle with 3 other nobles, all of them wearing expressions of grave concern. Eliza showed them to Adrian's study, then lingered by the door, her face worried. Your Grace, Pemberton began, we have come on a matter of some delicacy. Adrian did not look up from the papers he was reviewing. Then speak plainly. I do not have patience for political dancing. It has come to our attention that you have been spending considerable time in the dock district with a certain young woman of questionable reputation. Adrian's hand stopped moving. He set down his pen very carefully and looked up, his eyes cold. Questionable reputation. Explain. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. She is a common artist, Your Grace. No family, no connections, no wealth. And there are rumors that she has been seen in the company of various men. Adrian stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Those men were patrons, people who commissioned her work, and unless you have actual evidence of impropriety, I suggest you stop spreading vicious gossip about a woman you know nothing about. We are merely concerned for your reputation, Your Grace. My reputation? Adrian moved around the desk, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. Let me tell you about my reputation. I am known as the coldest man in the Northern Kingdom. People fear me. They avoid me. They tell their children stories about the Duke who has ice in his veins. Is that the reputation you are concerned about? Your Grace, we simply think that if you are going to take a companion, she should be someone more suitable to your station. Suitable. Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. You mean someone wealthy, someone with a title, someone who will sit quietly and look pretty and never challenge anything I say or do. Someone who will not damage your position at court, Lord Breton said, speaking up for the first time. And there it was. The real concern. Not Adrian's happiness or Clara's character, but political positioning and social advantage. Get out, Adrian said. Your Grace, we only mean to help. Get out of my house. Now. The nobles fled, and Eliza closed the door behind them, turning to face her brother. "You need to be careful," she said. "They're going to make this difficult. Let them try. Adrian, they have power. They can spread rumors, damage Clara's business, make her life impossible. Then I will stop them. How? However I have to." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression made Adrian pause. "What? You really care about her?" "Yes. More than your reputation? More than your position?" "Yes." "Then you need to talk to her, because when those men start their campaign, Clara is going to be the one who suffers, and she needs to know what she is getting into." Adrian found Clara at the studio that evening, working by lamplight. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What happened? We need to talk." He told her everything, about the nobles, their concerns, the political implications of their relationship. Clara listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each word. When he finished, she sat back, processing. "So basically, because you have been spending time with me, people think I am trying to seduce a duke for his money. That is what they are implying, yes. And they are going to make my life difficult unless I disappear. They are going to try." Clara stood, pacing the small studio. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I told you to be careful." "I know." "No, Adrian, I do not think you do." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You can walk away from this. You can go back to your castle and your title and your perfect aristocratic life. But I cannot. This is my life, my reputation, my livelihood. If they destroy it, I have nothing. Then let me help you." "How?" "By throwing money at the problem? By using your power to crush anyone who speaks against me? That just proves their point." "Then what do you want me to do?" Clara's voice broke. "I want you to think about whether I am worth it." The words hit Adrian like a knife to the chest. "You think I have not already asked myself that question? You think I do not know what this is costing? Then why are you doing it?" "Because you are worth everything." Adrian closed the distance between them, his voice fierce. "I spent 15 years dead inside, and you brought me back to life. So yes, you are worth my reputation. You are worth their gossip. You are worth every political consequence they can throw at me." "You do not mean that. Try me." Clara looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. What she saw there made her breath catch. "You are serious. Completely. You are going to throw away everything you have built for a woman you have known for less than 2 months. I'm going to choose to live instead of just exist. There is a difference. And if they destroy me anyway? If your protection is not enough? Then we will face it together." Clara shook her head, but she was crying now, tears tracking down her face. "You are insane." "Probably." Adrian reached up, brushing the tears away with his thumb. "But I would rather be insane and alive than sane and dead inside." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "This is a terrible idea." "I know. We are going to regret this." "Maybe." He tilted her face up. "But I'm willing to find out." "Adrian," she whispered. He kissed her, soft and careful and terrified of breaking something precious. Clara made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Well," Clara said shakily, "that complicates things, spectacularly." She laughed, that real unguarded laugh that had started everything. "You know what? Fine. Let them talk. Let them gossip. I have survived worse, so have I. Then we survived this together." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "But you need to promise me something. Anything. Do not try to fight all my battles for me. I am not some damsel who needs rescuing. If we are doing this, we do it as equals." "Agreed. And do not buy me things to make up for the scandal. I am not interested in being your kept woman. I would not dare." "Good." Clara kissed him again, quick and fierce. "Now get out. I have work to finish, and you are very distracting." Adrian left the studio feeling lighter than he had in years. Also terrified. Also exhilarated. The combination was overwhelming and addictive, and he never wanted it to stop. The scandal broke within a week. Pamphlets appeared on street corners, spreading rumors about the Duke and his common mistress. Clara's studio was vandalized twice. Patrons who had commissioned work suddenly canceled their orders. The harassment was relentless and cruel, and exactly what Eliza had warned about. Adrian did what he could. He hired guards to watch Clara's studio. He publicly commissioned 3 of her paintings for Blackthorn Castle. He made it clear that anyone who targeted her would answer to him personally. But Clara was right. His protection came with its own problems. Now she was not just a scandal. She was the woman the Duke was protecting, which made her seem even more like a kept woman, even more like someone using him for his wealth and power. The breaking point came when Clara arrived at her studio one morning to find a crowd gathered outside. Someone had painted a crude word across her door in red paint. The message was unmistakable and vicious. Clara stood there, staring at the word, her face completely blank. Then she picked up a bucket and started scrubbing. Adrian arrived an hour later to find her still working, her hands raw from the harsh soap, her face set in determined lines. "Stop," he said quietly. "I am almost done." "Clara, stop!" She dropped the brush and turned to face him, and the look in her eyes made his heart break. "They are never going to stop," she said. "As long as we are together, this is my life. Being attacked, being slandered, being reminded every single day that I do not belong in your world. So we fight harder." "No." Clara shook her head. "You fight harder. I just survive. And I'm tired of surviving. What are you saying?" "I am saying maybe everyone is right. Maybe this is too complicated. Maybe we should stop before it gets worse." Adrian felt panic claw at his chest. "You want to end this? I want to stop hurting." Clara's voice broke. "I want to go back to being invisible instead of being everyone's favorite target. I will fix this." "You cannot fix this." Her voice rose, echoing off the narrow street. "This is not something you can throw money at or intimidate into submission. This is the entire social structure telling us we do not belong together. Then we change the structure." Clara laughed, a bitter sound. "You cannot change centuries of class division because you decided you have feelings for a commoner. Watch me." And before Adrian could stop himself, before his rational mind could catch up with his instincts, he said the words that would change everything. "Marry me." Clara froze. "What?" "Marry me. Become my duchess. Then you are not my mistress or my scandal or my project. You are my equal in every legal sense." "Are you insane?" Clara's voice was faint. "We have known each other for 6 weeks. I have made bigger decisions on less information. That is not romantic, that is reckless. Maybe I'm tired of being careful." Adrian moved closer, his voice urgent. "You said you wanted to be equals. Marriage makes us equals. No more gossip about you being kept. No more questions about your place in my life. Marriage makes me your property under the law. Then we write new terms. We create a contract that gives you independence, your own income, your own space, your own life. But legally, you are protected. My name protects you. Your name is what is destroying me." "No!" Adrian's voice was fierce. "Their small-mindedness is destroying you. My name can shield you from it if you let it." Clara stared at him, her face pale, her eyes wide. "You are serious, completely. You want to marry me, a woman you barely know, a woman with no family, no title, no wealth. You want to make me a duchess. I want to make you my wife. Why? Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying and true. Adrian had not planned to say them, had not even fully admitted them to himself until they were already out. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God. Adrian, you cannot. Too late. You do not love me. You love the idea of feeling again. You love that I make you feel alive, that is not the same thing. Maybe it started that way." Adrian's voice was steady now, certain. "But somewhere between the studio and the vandalized door and watching you fight for every inch of dignity they try to take from you, it became real. I love you, Clara, and I am asking you to marry me. This is insane. Probably. We will regret this. Maybe. Everyone will hate us. I can live with that." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and Adrian saw the exact moment when she made her decision. Something in her face shifted, hardened into determination. "Fine." She squared her shoulders. "If we are doing this, we do it completely. No hiding, no apologizing. We walk into that aristocratic world and dare them to say something to our faces." "You're saying yes?" "I am saying that I would rather fight beside you than surrender to them. So yes, Adrian Vale, I will marry your impossible, overwhelming, ridiculously intense self. Adrian pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a drowning man finding air, and Clara kissed him back like she was claiming him, marking him as hers in front of anyone watching. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. You know this is going to be a disaster, right? Probably the biggest disaster the Northern Kingdom has ever seen. Good. Clara's eyes blazed with defiance. Let them watch us burn their world down. And that was when Adrian realized his sister had been right. When Vals loved, they consumed. They went to extremes. They made decisions that terrified rational people. He had just asked a woman he had known for 6 weeks to marry him and upend the entire social order, and she had said yes. And neither of them had any idea what they had just set in motion. But for the first time in 15 years, Adrian did not care about consequences or political ramifications or what anyone thought. He cared about the woman in his arms who had taught him to feel again, and he would burn down every rule and tradition that tried to separate them. The Duke who forgot how to feel had remembered, and God help anyone who tried to make him forget again. The announcement of their engagement hit the aristocratic world like a cannonball through glass. Within 24 hours, every noble house in the Northern Kingdom knew that Duke Adrian Vale intended to marry a common artist named Clara Whitmore, and the reactions ranged from shock to outrage to barely concealed schadenfreude. Adrian had expected resistance. What he had not expected was silence. The morning after he made the announcement public, not a single noble called to offer congratulations. No letters arrived expressing support or even polite acknowledgement. The silence was deliberate and damning, a collective turning of backs that spoke louder than any protest. Eliza found him in his study, staring at the empty desk where correspondence usually piled up. "They're organizing," she said without preamble. "I know. Adrian, this is serious. When the entire aristocracy goes quiet like this, it means they are planning something. Let them plan." He did not look up from the papers he was pretending to read. "I have made my choice. And what happens when they come for your estates, your lands, your political power? You think they will just let you marry a commoner and keep everything else? If they try to strip me of my title, they will have a fight on their hands." Eliza moved closer, her voice dropping. "You cannot fight the entire aristocratic system." Father tried. It destroyed him. Father was fighting for power. Adrian finally looked at her. "I am fighting for something that actually matters." His sister's expression softened. "I know, and I love you for it. But you need to be smart about this. They will use every weapon they have, and they do not care about collateral damage." "What are you saying?" "I am saying Clara is not safe. Not anymore. As long as she is your weakness, they will exploit it. Then I make her my strength." "How?" "By marrying her before they can stop me." "Adrian, you announced the engagement yesterday. Society expects at least 6 months of courtship and preparation. Society can expect whatever it wants." Adrian stood, his decision crystallizing. "We marry within the week. You are insane." "Possibly. But I'm also right. Every day we wait is another day they have to undermine us. So we do not wait." Clara thought he was insane too. "A week?" She stared at him across her studio, paintbrush frozen in midair. "Adrian, that is not enough time to plan anything resembling a proper wedding." "Good. I do not want a proper wedding. I want a binding legal commitment that makes you my wife before anyone can interfere. This is romantic in the most bizarre way possible. I am trying to protect you." "By rushing me into marriage?" Clara set down her brush. "This is exactly what they will say, that you are acting impulsively, that I manipulated you into this, that the engagement is proof you have lost your mind. Do you think I have lost my mind? Honestly? Yes. But I am apparently just as insane because I am considering it." "Then consider faster." Adrian moved closer. "Every day we delay, they organize. Every day we wait, they build their case against us. I am not giving them that time." Clara studied his face, and he could see her working through the logic, the strategy, the brutal practicality of what he was proposing. "1 week," she said finally. "That gives me exactly 7 days to prepare for becoming the most hated woman in the Northern Kingdom. You will not be alone in it." "No, I will just be the easier target." She was right, of course. The attacks intensified the moment word spread that the wedding would happen quickly. More vandalism at her studio. Anonymous letters filled with vicious threats. Crowds of well-dressed nobles who happened to be walking past when Clara was outside, their loud conversations about social climbing and moral corruption impossible to ignore. Adrian hired more guards, moved Clara into a protected wing of Blackthorn Castle for her own safety. Began the process of drafting a marriage contract that would give her unprecedented independence and legal protection. And through it all, he watched her spine straighten, her jaw set, her defiance grow harder and sharper with each attack. She was not breaking. She was forging herself into something that could survive their world. The wedding was set for Saturday morning in the private chapel at Blackthorn Castle. No guests beyond immediate family. No elaborate ceremony. Just the legal minimum required to make it binding. On Friday afternoon, Lord Pemberton requested an urgent audience. Adrian received him in the formal parlor, a room designed to intimidate with its soaring ceilings and austere furnishings. Pemberton arrived with Lord Breton and 3 other senior nobles, all of them wearing expressions of grave concern that did not quite hide their satisfaction. "Your Grace," Pemberton began, "we have come on a matter of utmost importance." "Then speak. It concerns your upcoming marriage." "My marriage is not your concern. I am afraid it is." Breton stepped forward, holding a leather portfolio. "We have discovered information about Miss Whitmore that you need to see before making an irrevocable decision." Adrian felt ice slide down his spine. Whatever they had found, they believed it was devastating. The confidence radiating off them was palpable. "Show me." Breton opened the portfolio and laid out a series of documents on the table. Financial records, letters, legal documents with official seals. "Your Grace, we have learned that Miss Whitmore's father did not simply die in debt. He died while under investigation for treason against the crown. Specifically, for selling state secrets to foreign powers in exchange for money to pay his wife's medical expenses." Adrian's blood went cold. He picked up the documents, scanning them quickly. They looked legitimate. Official stamps, multiple signatures, dates that aligned with Clara's timeline. Furthermore, Pemberton continued, Miss Whitmore herself received payments from these same foreign contacts after her father's death. We have bank records showing regular deposits into an account under her name. You are accusing her of continuing her father's treason. We are presenting facts, Your Grace. What you do with them is your decision." Adrian stared at the papers in his hands, his mind racing. If this was true, if Clara was connected to treason, marrying her would not just be a social scandal, it would be political suicide. The crown could strip him of everything. But something did not fit. Clara lived in poverty. If she had been receiving payments from foreign powers, where was the money? "These deposits," he said slowly. "When were they made?" Breton flipped to another page. "Monthly. For the past 2 years. Roughly £300 each time. And you are saying this is payment for espionage. What else could it be?" Adrian's mind worked through the problem with the cold logic his father had beaten into him. £300 a month would have lifted Clara out of poverty entirely. Yet she lived in a cramped studio, wore mended clothes, struggled for every commission, unless someone was setting her up. "Where did you get these documents?" Adrian asked quietly. "From contacts within the Treasury and Intelligence Services. All official channels. And you just happened to discover this the day before my wedding. The timing is unfortunate, but the information is accurate." Adrian looked at each of them in turn, seeing the calculation in their eyes. This was their move, their weapon. Present information that looked damning enough to make him call off the wedding or proceed and watch his entire life collapse under accusations of treason by association. "Get out," he said. "Your Grace, you must consider. Get out of my house, now, before I have you thrown out." They left, but the documents remained on the table like a pile of carefully arranged poison. Adrian stood alone in the parlor for nearly an hour, staring at the papers, his mind at war with itself. Part of him, the part that had learned to survive by trusting no one, whispered that the evidence was too specific to be fabricated, that Clara might have secrets she had not shared, that he barely knew her and was about to chain his life to hers based on weeks of acquaintance and overwhelming emotion. The other part, the part that had learned to feel again because of her, screamed that this was exactly the kind of trap he had spent 15 years setting for others. Documents that looked real but told a carefully constructed lie. He needed to talk to Clara. He found her in the East Wing, working on something at a small desk. She looked up when he entered, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What happened?" "We need to talk about your father." Clara went very still. "What about him?" Adrian laid the documents on the desk in front of her. "They are accusing him of treason, of selling state secrets, and they are saying you continued his work after he died." She stared at the papers, her face draining of color. Then she started laughing, a harsh, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Of course they are. Of course this is what they would do." "Clara, I need you to tell me the truth, all of it." "The truth?" She stood, her hands shaking. "The truth is that my father spent his entire life working for your father. He was a clerk in the Duke's intelligence service. He had access to sensitive information because that was his job. My father is dead, and his sins are not." Clara's voice rose. "Your father was the one selling secrets, Adrian. He was the traitor. My father discovered it and threatened to expose him. So your father destroyed him, manufactured evidence of treason, ruined his reputation, made sure no one would believe anything he said. And when my father tried to fight back, the stress and shame killed him." Adrian felt the floor tilt beneath him. "You are saying my father was a traitor." "I am saying your father was a monster who destroyed anyone who threatened him. And when he died, his allies made sure my father's name stayed buried in shame." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Those deposits they found? That is my inheritance. Money my father saved before your father destroyed him. It was in a trust that released payments to me monthly, because my father knew he would not live to see me grown. It is not foreign money. It is my father's blood money, earned serving a man who betrayed his kingdom and then blamed it on the people he was supposed to protect." "Prove it." "I cannot." Clara's voice broke. "Your father made sure every piece of evidence pointed at mine. That was his gift. Making guilty men look innocent and innocent men look guilty." "Then how do you know this is true?" "Because my father told me. On his deathbed. He made me promise never to speak of it, never to seek revenge, never to do anything that would put me in danger. He said the Vale family would destroy me if I tried to expose them. And yet you came to my party. You sought me out." "No. I came for my mother's painting. Meeting you was an accident." Clara's face was wet with tears now. "And falling for you was the stupidest thing I have ever done, because it put me exactly where my father warned me not to be, at the mercy of the Vale family." Adrian felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Everything she was saying aligned with what he knew about his father. The ruthlessness, the paranoia, the absolute certainty that anyone who questioned him was an enemy to be eliminated. But he had no proof, just Clara's word against documents that looked official and damning. And tomorrow morning, he was supposed to marry her. "I need time to think," he said. "Adrian, do not do this. I'm not doing anything yet. I just need to verify—" "Verify what?" "That I am not a traitor? That my word is worth something?" Clara's voice was raw. "You either trust me or you do not. There is no middle ground here. This is not about trust. This is about protecting both of us from what? The truth about your family?" She laughed again, that broken sound. "You want to know the real reason I fought so hard to get that painting back? Because my mother painted it the day after my father told her what your father really was. And she painted that forest path like it was the last beautiful thing in a world that was about to turn ugly. She knew what was coming. She knew we would lose everything. And she painted anyway because that is what you do when the world is ending. You create something beautiful to remember it by." Adrian looked at the woman he had asked to marry him, really looked at her, and saw the weight of grief and rage and desperate hope all tangled together. She was telling the truth. Every instinct he had screamed that she was telling the truth. But he had been wrong before, had trusted his instincts about his father for years before realizing the man was a monster. "I need 48 hours, he said, "to investigate, to find proof that supports your story. And if you cannot find it, then we make a decision." Clara stared at him, and the look in her eyes made his chest ache. "You just made a decision. You decided that their documents are more credible than my word. You decided that protecting yourself is more important than protecting me. That is not fair. Nothing about this is fair." Clara moved to the door, then stopped. "You want to know what the worst part is? I do not even blame you. Your father taught you not to trust anyone. And here I am, asking you to trust me with no evidence except my word and the fact that I love you. Of course you cannot do it. You do not know how." She left, and Adrian stood alone in a room that suddenly felt far too large and far too empty. He spent the next 36 hours tearing through every document in his father's private archives. Files that had been sealed since the old Duke's death, correspondence marked confidential, financial records buried in deliberately confusing accounts. And slowly, piece by piece, he found it, evidence of his father's treason. Carefully hidden, meticulously covered up, but there. Payments from foreign powers disguised as legitimate business transactions, intelligence reports that had been altered before being passed to the crown, and most damning, a series of letters between his father and several high-ranking nobles, coordinating the destruction of a clerk named Whitmore who had discovered the scheme. Adrian read every word, his stomach churning, his hands shaking. His father had not just been ruthless. He had been a traitor to his own kingdom, and he had destroyed innocent people to hide it. And those same nobles who had helped his father cover it up were now trying to use that old crime to destroy Adrian's marriage. By Saturday morning, Adrian had assembled a complete picture of the conspiracy. He had names, he had evidence, he had everything he needed to clear Clara's father's name and expose the men who had tried to frame her. He also had a choice to make. He could take this evidence to the crown, expose his father's treason posthumously, destroy the political network that had supported the old Duke, watch as the Vale family name was dragged through scandal and his own position became untenable, or he could bury it. Let Clara's father's name stay tarnished. Let the nobles believe they had won. Protect the Vale legacy at the cost of the truth. It was exactly the kind of choice his father would have made without hesitation. Protect the family, protect the power. Let innocent people burn if it served the greater goal of maintaining control. Adrian stared at the document spread across his desk and realized he was standing at the exact same crossroads where his father had chosen to become a monster. The wedding was scheduled for 10 o'clock. At 9:30, Adrian walked to the chapel. Clara was already there, standing alone in a simple white dress that she had made herself. She looked pale and tired and absolutely beautiful. And when she saw him, her expression was guarded. "Are you here to call it off?" she asked. "No." Adrian moved down the aisle toward her. "I am here to apologize." "For what?" "For doubting you. For putting their word above yours. For forgetting that trust is not something you wait to earn. It is something you choose to give." He reached her and pulled out the folder of documents he had spent all night compiling. "This is proof. Everything your father told you was true. My father was the traitor. And these nobles have been protecting that secret for years." He set the folder on the altar between them. "I am going to the crown with this today. I am exposing all of it." Clara looked at the folder, then at him, her eyes wide. "Adrian, if you do that, you will destroy your family's reputation. I know. You will lose political allies, probably land, maybe your title. I know." "Then why?" "Because you were right." Adrian's voice was steady. "I am either going to be the kind of man who protects truth, or I am going to be my father, and I refuse to be him." Tears spilled down Clara's face. "You are an idiot." "Probably. We are going to lose everything." "Maybe." Adrian reached for her hands. "But we will lose it together. And we will still have something he never had." "What?" "Each other. And the knowledge that we chose to do the right thing even when it cost us everything." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and then she started laughing through her tears. "You know what? Fine. Let us burn it all down. Let us tell the truth and watch their precious aristocratic world collapse." She kissed him, fierce and desperate, and full of defiant hope. The ceremony was short and legally binding and witnessed only by Eliza and two servants who were sworn to secrecy until Adrian could present his evidence to the crown. When it was over, Clara Whitmore became Clara Vale, Duchess of the Northern Territories, and the countdown to complete destruction began. That afternoon, Adrian sent his compiled evidence to the crown, along with a detailed letter explaining everything. He named names, he provided documentation. He made it impossible for anyone to claim ignorance. By evening, the royal investigators had arrived at Blackthorn Castle. By midnight, arrest warrants had been issued for Lord Pemberton, Lord Breton, and 4 other senior nobles. By dawn, the entire kingdom knew that the old Duke Vale had been a traitor, and his son had exposed it. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Half of Adrian's political allies abandoned him overnight. Business contracts were canceled. Invitations to court were rescinded. The Vale family name, which had commanded respect and fear for generations, became synonymous with betrayal and scandal. Adrian received a summons from the king on Monday morning. He went alone, leaving Clara at the castle with explicit instructions to Garrett to protect her no matter what happened. The royal audience chamber was filled with advisors and nobles, all of them watching as Adrian approached the throne. The king was a man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a face that revealed nothing. "Duke Vale," the king began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have created quite a situation. I have exposed treason, Your Majesty. I believed you would want to know that your intelligence had been compromised for years. And in doing so, you have destabilized the northern aristocracy and called into question the integrity of several of my most trusted advisors who were complicit in selling state secrets to foreign powers. Allegedly complicit." The king leaned forward. "You understand the position this puts me in. If I act on your accusations, I create a power vacuum in the north. If I do not act, I appear weak and complicit myself." Adrian felt the ground shifting beneath him. This was not about truth or justice. This was about political calculation. "Your Majesty, I am prepared to provide additional evidence." "I do not need more evidence." The king cut him off. "I need solutions. You have torn down a structure that took decades to build. What do you propose to put in its place?" And there it was, the real test. Could Adrian offer a path forward that served the crown's interests, or was he just another idealist who could tear things down but not rebuild? Adrian took a breath and made the only offer he could. "I will take responsibility for stabilizing the northern territories. I will personally oversee the restructuring of the intelligence network. I will use my position to rebuild trust with foreign powers who were affected by my father's betrayal. And I will do it without any of the political power or protection I previously enjoyed." "You are offering to clean up your father's mess while being publicly disgraced." "Yes." "Why?" "Because it is the right thing to do. And because someone has to pay the price for his crimes. Since he is dead, that someone is me." The king studied him for a long moment. "Your new wife. The commoner. This is her influence? She taught me to value truth over power, a dangerous lesson for a duke. Perhaps, but a necessary one for a man." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Every noble present understood what was happening. The king was deciding whether to salvage Adrian or destroy him completely. "Very well," the king said finally. "You will keep your title and your lands, but you will work under direct royal oversight. Every decision you make will be reviewed. Every alliance you form will be scrutinized. You will rebuild the north, Duke Vale, but you will do it under a microscope." "I understand. And if you fail, or if I discover you have inherited any of your father's tendencies, I will strip you of everything. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Majesty." Adrian left the palace knowing he had won and lost in equal measure. He had kept his position but lost his autonomy. He had protected Clara but shackled himself to years of oversight and suspicion. When he returned to Blackthorn Castle, Clara was waiting in the entrance hall. She took one look at his face and knew. "How bad?" she asked. "We keep everything, but we are under royal supervision indefinitely. I will spend years proving I am not my father." Clara moved to him, taking his hands. "Good. You should spend years proving you are not him. We both should. You are not angry?" "Angry? Adrian, you just gave up your freedom to protect my father's memory and expose the truth. I am terrified and proud and completely overwhelmed, but I'm not angry." He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of paint and courage that clung to her. "I married you yesterday, and I have already destroyed your life." "No." Clara pulled back to look at him. "You married me yesterday and chose truth over comfort. You chose to be better than the man who raised you. That is not destruction. That is transformation. It feels like destruction. That is because transformation always does." She cupped his face in her paint-stained hands. "We tore down everything that was built on lies. Now we get to build something new, something true. It is going to be hard and ugly, and everyone is going to hate us for a while. But at least we will know we did the right thing." Adrian looked at his wife, this woman who had crashed into his carefully controlled life and set it on fire, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose, direction. The sense that he was finally on the right path, even if it was the hardest one. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "Now?" Clara smiled, that fierce, defiant smile he had fallen in love with. Now we survive. And then we show them all that commoners and disgraced dukes can build something better than what came before. They stood together in the entrance hall of Blackthorn Castle, married less than 48 hours, facing the complete destruction of everything Adrian had spent his life building, and neither of them flinched. Because transformation was never gentle, truth was never convenient, and choosing to be better than your worst instincts always came with a price. They just had to hope they were strong enough to pay it, and survive what was still coming. Because this was not the end of their trials, this was only the beginning. The first 3 months under royal oversight felt like living in a cage built from politeness and suspicion. Every decision Adrian made was reviewed by royal appointees who arrived unannounced and departed with notes that would determine his future. Every conversation was potentially monitored. Every alliance was scrutinized for signs that he had inherited his father's capacity for betrayal. Clara watched her husband transform under the weight of it, not back into the cold, distant duke she had first met, but into something harder, something forged in the furnace of constant judgment and the knowledge that one misstep would destroy everything they had fought to build. They were sitting in the morning room when the letter arrived. Garrett brought it on a silver tray, his face grave. Clara knew before Adrian opened it that something had shifted. He read in silence, his expression going carefully blank in a way that made her stomach clench. "What is it?" she asked. "The Winter Assembly." Adrian set the letter down with precise control. "The king is requiring my attendance. All northern nobles will be there. That is normal, is it not? You attend every year. Not like this." Adrian's jaw tightened. "This is a test. They want to see if I can face the people I exposed, if I can maintain control of the northern territories when half of them want me dead and the other half just want me gone. Then we face them. Clara, you do not understand. This is not just politics. Some of these people lost everything because of what I did. Their allies are in prison. Their reputations are destroyed. They're not going to be satisfied with cold shoulders and whispered insults." "What are you saying?" "I am saying this could get dangerous." Adrian stood, pacing to the window. "The Winter Assembly is where power is displayed and challenged. It is where the northern lords show their strength and stake their claims. If they decide I am weak, if they smell blood in the water, they will come for me. Then we show them you are not weak. How? By pretending everything is fine? By playing the role of the confident duke when everyone knows I am one royal review away from losing my title? No." Clara moved to stand beside him. "By being exactly what you are, a man who chose truth over power and is still standing. That is not weakness, Adrian. That is the most terrifying kind of strength." He looked at her, and she saw the fear he was trying to hide. Not fear of the nobles or their schemes, but fear of failing. Fear of proving that choosing the right thing had been a mistake that would cost them everything. "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "If something happens at the assembly, if they come after me and you are caught in it, then I fight beside you." Clara took his hand. "That is what wives do. That is what soldiers do. Maybe I am both now." Adrian pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, and Clara felt the tremor running through him. He was terrified, and trying so hard not to show it that he was vibrating with the effort of holding himself together. She understood, in that moment, what survival truly cost. Not just the obvious sacrifices, but the constant strain of appearing strong when you felt like you were fracturing from the inside out. The exhausting performance of being unbreakable when every breath felt like it might be the one that finally shattered you. "We're going to be fine," she whispered, not sure if she believed it, but needing him to hear it anyway. "Promise me something. Anything. If it gets bad, if they come for me in a way I cannot stop, you run. You take Eliza and you disappear, and you do not look back. Adrian, promise me." Clara pulled back to look at him, seeing the desperate determination in his eyes. "No." "What?" "No, I will not promise to abandon you. We survive this together or not at all. That is not practical." "I do not care." Clara's voice hardened. "You do not get to be noble and self-sacrificing now. We made vows. In sickness and in health, in scandal and under royal investigation, in danger, and when half the kingdom wants us dead. Those were the vows. Or did I misunderstand?" Despite everything, Adrian laughed. It was strained and rough, but real. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met." "Good." That means we match. The winter assembly took place at the royal palace in the capital, a massive complex that had housed kings for 300 years. Every northern noble of consequence would be there, along with representatives from the crown and enough political maneuvering to fill a dozen scandal sheets. Adrian and Clara arrived on a gray morning that threatened snow, their carriage bearing the Vale coat of arms that now felt like a target painted on their backs. Eliza had insisted on coming despite Adrian's protests, and now sat across from them with her own expression of grim determination. "Remember," Eliza said as they approached the palace gates, "they will try to isolate you, separate you from allies, from Clara, from anyone who might support you. Do not let them. I know their tactics." Knowing them and surviving them are different things. The carriage stopped. Garrett opened the door, and Adrian stepped out first, turning to help Clara down. The moment her feet touched the ground, a crowd of nobles 20 feet away went silent, staring at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. This was what drowning in public felt like, Clara realized. Every eye judging, every whisper cutting, every second stretching into an eternity of exposure. Adrian offered his arm, and she took it, lifting her chin. They walked through the palace doors together, and Clara felt the weight of hundreds of gazes tracking their movement like predators watching wounded prey. The opening reception was held in the grand ballroom, the same kind of glittering aristocratic nightmare that Clara had crashed months ago. Except now she was not an intruder stealing back a painting. She was the Duchess Vale, and that made her a much bigger target. They had been in the room for less than 5 minutes when Lady Hartwick approached, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. "Duchess Vale," she said, the title dripping with contempt. "How interesting to finally meet the woman who destroyed so many lives." Clara felt Adrian tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "Lady Hartwick, how interesting to meet someone who believes protecting traitors is more important than protecting the kingdom." The older woman's face flushed. "You overstep, girl." "Do I?" Clara smiled, all teeth. "Or am I just the first person to say it to your face? Your husband exposed good men. My husband exposed traitors." Clara's voice dropped, went cold. "If they were your friends, you might want to examine your own loyalties." Lady Hartwick looked like she wanted to strike her. Instead, she turned sharply and walked away, and Clara felt her hand shaking from the adrenaline. "That was dangerous," Adrian murmured. "That was necessary. They are going to come at you harder now. Good, let them come." But Clara's bravado lasted only until the formal dinner, where the seating arrangements had been carefully designed to maximize discomfort. Adrian was placed at the head table near the king, a position of honor that also meant he was on display for the entire assembly. Clara was seated 3 tables away, surrounded by nobles she did not know, and who made no effort to hide their disdain. Eliza was somewhere on the opposite side of the room. They had been separated, exactly as predicted. Dinner was a slow form of torture. The nobles around Clara spoke to each other, but not to her, as if she were invisible. When servants came by, they served everyone else first, leaving Clara waiting until the food was nearly cold. Small cruelties designed to remind her that she did not belong. Clara endured it with gritted teeth and a face that revealed nothing. She had survived 3 years of poverty and loss and fighting for every commission. She could survive aristocratic meanness, but then Lord Pembroke, seated to her right, leaned close and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Tell me, Duchess, is it true your father died screaming for mercy? Or is that just another lie you people tell?" Clara's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She turned slowly to look at him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him lean back slightly. "My father," she said very quietly, "died with more honor in his last breath than you have shown in your entire life. And if you ever speak of him again, I will make sure everyone in this room knows exactly what kind of man insults the dead to feel powerful." Pembroke's face went red. "You dare threaten me?" "I dare state facts." Clara set down her fork with deliberate care. "Which is apparently threatening in your world." She stood, ignoring the gasps from nearby nobles, and walked out of the dining hall with her head high and her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. She made it to an empty corridor before the shaking started. Not from fear, but from rage so intense it felt like it might burn her alive from the inside out. They were never going to stop, never going to accept her, never going to see her as anything but the common woman who had trapped a duke. Clara leaned against the cold stone wall and focused on breathing, in and out, slow and steady. Do not cry. Do not give them that satisfaction. Footsteps approached and she straightened, preparing for another confrontation. But it was Adrian who appeared around the corner, his face tight with concern. I saw you leave. What happened? Nothing. Just needed air. Clara. He moved closer, studying her face. Tell me. Your friend Lord Pembroke decided to insult my dead father to his daughter's face during dinner. Clara's voice was flat. So I told him he was a coward and walked out before I said something that would get you in more trouble. Adrian's expression went deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. Where is he? Adrian, do not. He insulted your father. He made you leave a royal dinner. I am going to… To what? Challenge him? Start a fight at the Winter Assembly? Clara grabbed his arm. That is exactly what they want. They are trying to provoke us into doing something stupid so they can use it against us. I do not care. Yes, you do. You care because you are smart and strategic, and you know that winning this war means not losing our tempers in battles they have designed to make us snap. Adrian looked at her, and Clara saw the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted blood and revenge fighting against the part that knew she was right. I'm so tired of being careful, he said finally. I know, me too. But we are almost through this. Shh, just a few more days. And then what? We go back to Blackthorn and wait for the next test? The next humiliation? Then we prove we are stronger than all of them combined. How? By surviving. By refusing to break no matter what they do. By showing them that common women and disgraced dukes can outlast their cruelty. Adrian pulled her into his arms and Clara felt the tension radiating through him. He was close to breaking point. They both were. And the assembly had barely begun. The next morning brought a summons to the throne room. Not just Adrian, but Clara as well. A formal audience with the king in front of the full assembly. This was it, the real test. They dressed in their finest clothes, armor made of silk and velvet, and walked through corridors that seemed to narrow with every step. Nobles lined the walls, watching them pass, and Clara heard the whispers following them like a wave of poison. Traitor's son. Commoner whore. Pretenders playing at nobility. The throne room was packed. Every noble in the assembly had crowded in to watch whatever was about to happen. The king sat on his throne with that same unreadable expression, and standing to his right was a man Clara did not recognize. Older, with military bearing and eyes that missed nothing. Duke Vale, the king began, his voice carrying through the absolute silence. You have been under royal oversight for 3 months. General Whitmore here has reviewed all reports from that period. Clara's breath caught. Whitmore. That was her father's name. The general stepped forward, holding a thick folder. Your Majesty, I have completed my assessment of Duke Vale's management of the Northern Territories during the oversight period. The tension in the room was suffocating. This was the moment, pass or fail, salvation or destruction. And, the king prompted. General Whitmore opened the folder and began to read. Duke Vale has restructured the entire Northern Intelligence Network. He has personally met with every territory lord to address concerns about the previous administration's failures. He has improved communication protocols, tightened security, and rebuilt relationships with 3 foreign powers who had severed contact due to his father's betrayal. Adrian stood perfectly still, his face revealing nothing, but Clara felt his hand find hers and squeeze. Furthermore, the general continued, Duke Vale has done this while facing constant opposition, social ostracism, and threats to his safety and that of his family. He has maintained discipline, professionalism, and transparency throughout. His conduct has been exemplary. The king leaned forward. And your recommendation? I recommend the oversight period be concluded. Duke Vale has proven himself capable of managing the Northern Territories without direct supervision. The throne room erupted in whispers. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief, but she forced herself to stay upright, stay composed. The king raised a hand and silence fell. Very well. Duke Vale, your oversight period is hereby concluded. You will continue to manage the Northern Territories with full ducal authority. Thank you, Your Majesty. However, the king's voice went hard. Let this serve as a lesson to every noble in this room. Betrayal in any form will be rooted out and punished. The crimes of the previous Duke Vale do not transfer to his son, but neither do they absolve him. He has earned his position through work, not inheritance. Let that be the new standard we hold ourselves to. It was a victory, but a strange one. Adrian had been cleared, but the king had also made it clear that he was on permanent probation. One mistake, one hint of following his father's path, and it would all come crashing down. As they turned to leave, General Whitmore stepped forward and spoke quietly, just for them. "A word, Duchess Vale." Clara stopped, confused. Adrian tensed beside her, but the general's expression was not hostile. "Your father," the general said, "was a good man and a patriot. What happened to him was an injustice that I was not in a position to prevent at the time. I am glad his daughter has found a way to restore his honor." "You knew him?" Clara's voice was faint. "I served with him for 10 years before his death. He was one of the best men I ever knew, and he would be proud of what you have done." The general nodded once, then returned to his position by the throne, leaving Clara standing there with tears threatening to spill over. Adrian's arm came around her shoulders. "Come on, let us get out of here." They made it back to their chambers before Clara finally broke down. Not from despair, but from the sheer overwhelming weight of vindication. Her father's name had been cleared, not publicly, not in a way that would make the history books, but in the only way that mattered, by someone who knew him, who knew the truth. Adrian held her while she cried, and when she finally pulled herself together, he was smiling despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "We did it," he said. "We survived. Barely. Barely is enough." But the celebration was short-lived. That evening, as they prepared for the closing ball of the assembly, Garrett arrived with news that made Adrian's face go pale. "Your Grace, there is a problem. Several of the younger northern lords are planning something for tonight." "Planning what?" Garrett hesitated. "A challenge. They're going to demand a formal contest of leadership. If you refuse or fail, they will petition the king to replace you as head of the Northern Territories." Clara felt ice slide through her veins. "Can they do that?" "Technically, yes." Adrian sat heavily. "If enough territory lords vote against me, the king can remove me and appoint someone else. It is an old law, rarely used, but legal. So what do we do? I go to the ball and face whatever they have planned." "Adrian, this is a trap." "I know. But if I do not face it, I look weak, and weak leaders do not last long in the north." The closing ball was the grandest event of the assembly, held in the palace's largest ballroom, under chandeliers that could have bought a small estate. Everyone who mattered was there, dressed in their finest, playing their last political games before the assembly ended, and they all returned to their territories. Adrian and Clara entered together, and immediately Clara felt the atmosphere shift. Nobles moved aside, creating a clear path to the center of the room, where a group of young lords stood waiting. Their leader was a man in his early 30s named Lord Ashford, all aristocratic arrogance and predatory confidence. He stepped forward as Adrian approached. "Duke Vale," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "On behalf of the Northern Territories, I issue a formal challenge." "What kind of challenge?" Adrian's voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "A test of leadership. You claim to be fit to rule the North, but many of us question whether someone with your father's blood and your wife's common influence can truly represent our interests." The insult was deliberate and calculated. Adrian's hand tightened on Clara's, but his expression remained neutral. "State the terms." "Simple. A series of challenges that test the qualities we value in a leader. Strategy, courage, honor. Complete them successfully and we acknowledge your right to lead. Fail, and you step aside for someone more suitable. And if I refuse, then you prove you are unfit by refusing to defend your position. It was a perfect trap. Accept and risk failure. Refuse and look cowardly. Either way, they won." Adrian looked at Clara, and she saw the question in his eyes. She squeezed his hand once, hard, and nodded. They had not come this far to back down now. "I accept," Adrian said. The ballroom erupted in excited chatter. This was entertainment, a spectacle, the kind of drama that would be talked about for years. Ashford smiled. "Excellent. We begin now. The first challenge is strategy, a game of chess, you against me, best of 3 games." They cleared a space and brought out an ornate chess set. Adrian sat across from Ashford while Clara stood behind him, her heart pounding. The first game lasted 20 minutes. Adrian won decisively, his moves precise and ruthless. Ashford's confidence wavered. The second game took longer. Ashford played more carefully, but Adrian still won, sacrificing his queen in a move that made the watching nobles gasp. The third game was unnecessary, but they played it anyway. Adrian won again, this time in 15 moves that left Ashford staring at the board in disbelief. Strategy, Adrian said quietly, is not about power. It is about knowing when to sacrifice and when to strike. Next challenge. Ashford's face was red, but he nodded to one of his companions. Lord Craven stepped forward. The second challenge is courage. A duel, first blood only, but you fight with real blades. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Adrian had never mentioned being trained in swordplay, but he stood calmly, accepting the sword Craven offered. They moved to an open space, the nobles forming a circle around them. The duel was short and brutal. Craven attacked aggressively, clearly expecting to overpower Adrian quickly. But Adrian fought with the cold precision of someone who had been trained since childhood, deflecting blows and waiting for an opening. When it came, he struck fast, his blade slicing across Craven's arm in a shallow cut that drew blood but did no real damage. First blood, the referee called. Duke Vale wins. Craven backed away, clutching his arm, and Adrian handed back the sword without a word. 2 down, Ashford said, his voice tight. 1 more. The challenge of honor. What does that mean? It means you confess the truth. Ashford moved closer, his voice dropping. Tell everyone here what you really are. The son of a traitor who married a commoner to hide his family's shame. Admit that you are using her, that this whole righteous crusade has been about saving your reputation, not about truth or justice. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Clara felt the words hit her like physical blows. This was the real challenge. Not chess or swords, but this. The accusation that everything they had been through, everything they had fought for, was a lie. Adrian looked at Ashford for a long moment. Then he turned to face the entire assembly. You want the truth? Adrian's voice carried to every corner of the room. Here it is. I am the son of a traitor. My father sold state secrets and destroyed innocent people to cover his crimes. That is my legacy. That is the truth I have to carry for the rest of my life. He paused, and Clara saw something shift in his expression, something breaking free. But my wife is not part of that shame. She is the only reason I am still standing here. She taught me that truth matters more than reputation, that doing the right thing is worth losing everything for. And yes, I married a commoner, because she has more honor in her little finger than most of you have in your entire bodies. You overstep, Ashford snarled. No. Adrian's voice went hard. You overstep. You stand here questioning my fitness to lead while defending men who committed treason. You insult my wife while pretending you care about honor. You challenge me to prove my worth while offering nothing but cruelty and political games. He moved forward, and Ashford actually took a step back. So here's my challenge to you. Go ahead. Vote me out. Replace me with someone who will tell you comfortable lies instead of uncomfortable truths. But know this. When the next crisis comes, when the North needs a leader who will put the kingdom before politics, you will remember this moment. You will remember that you chose comfort over courage. The silence was absolute. Clara could barely breathe. Then from somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause. Others joined. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to show that Adrian's words had landed. Ashford looked around, his face pale, and Clara saw the moment he realized he had lost. Not the formal challenge, but something more important. The narrative, the story people would tell about this night. I withdraw the petition, Ashford said finally, the words forced out through gritted teeth. Adrian nodded once. Then we are done here. He turned and walked toward Clara, who met him halfway. They left the ballroom together, the applause still echoing behind them, and did not stop until they reached their chambers. The moment the door closed, Adrian collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking. I thought I was going to lose, he said. Halfway through that speech, I thought I had just destroyed everything. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Clara knelt in front of him, taking his hands. That is what made it magnificent. You were terrified and you did it anyway. Adrian pulled her up and into his lap, burying his face in her neck. We survived. We did more than survive. We won. Did we? Adrian's voice was muffled. It does not feel like winning. That is because you are still standing. Winning when you are completely broken feels different than winning when you are whole. Less triumphant. More like relief. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, letting the adrenaline finally drain away. But later, as they prepared for bed, a knock came at the door. Garrett entered, his face grave. "Your Grace, there is news from Blackthorn Castle. A messenger just arrived." "What kind of news?" "Your lands have been attacked. Raiders from the eastern territories. They burned 3 villages and are moving toward the castle itself." Adrian went absolutely still. "When?" "2 days ago. The messenger rode hard to reach you. But Your Grace, there is more." "What?" "They were not random raiders. Someone hired them. Someone with resources and connections. This was a coordinated attack meant to happen while you were away from home." Clara felt her blood run cold. "They are trying to finish what the assembly could not." Adrian stood, his face going hard. "How long to get back?" 3 days if we ride hard and do not stop. Then we leave now." Adrian turned to Clara. "You stay here where it is safe." "Absolutely not." "Clara, we already had this conversation. We survived together or not at all." Adrian looked at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him nod. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say when we get there." They left within the hour, riding through the night with Garrett and a contingent of guards. The journey back to Blackthorn was brutal, pushing the horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary. As they crested the final hill overlooking the valley where the castle stood, Clara saw smoke rising from multiple points. The raids were still ongoing. Adrian stared at his burning lands, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with something Clara had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but cold, absolute determination. "This ends now," he said quietly. "Tonight, we show them what happens when they threaten everything we have fought to protect." He spurred his horse forward, and Clara followed, her heart pounding with terror and defiance in equal measure. They were riding into a war zone with no guarantee they would survive. But they were riding in together. And that made all the difference. The battle for Blackthorn Castle was about to begin. The first thing Adrian noticed as they descended toward Blackthorn Castle was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter evening, but the hollow emptiness that came after violence had torn through a place and left it bleeding. Smoke rose from the village settlements in thin gray columns that merged with the darkening sky, and the air tasted of ash and something else. Fear, maybe, or the metallic tang of lives being permanently altered. Clara rode beside him with her back straight and her face set in lines that reminded him of soldiers preparing for battle. She had not spoken since they crested the hill, just kept her eyes fixed on the castle ahead, and Adrian wondered what kind of transformation happened inside a person when they realized that survival was no longer about protecting what you had, but about deciding what pieces of yourself you were willing to lose to keep breathing. They found Captain Morris at the outer gates, his uniform torn and stained with blood that might or might not have been his own. The man looked like he had aged 10 years and 3 days, his face haggard, his eyes carrying the weight of decisions that would haunt him long after the wounds healed. "Your Grace," Morris said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God. We have been holding them off, but they keep coming in waves. Professional raiders, well-armed, coordinated. This was not some random bandit attack." "How many dead?" Adrian's voice was flat, already preparing himself for numbers that would carve themselves into his conscience. 17 villagers, 5 guards, another dozen wounded badly enough that they might not make it through the week. Adrian felt each number like a physical blow. These were his people, his responsibility. And they had died because someone wanted to destroy him through them. "Where are the raiders now?" "Pulled back to the eastern woods. They are regrouping." Morris hesitated. "Your Grace, there is something else. We captured one of them. He claims he was hired by a consortium of northern nobles. Says they paid him to make the attacks look random, but to specifically target anything connected to the Vale family." "Of course they did." Adrian's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. Because political challenges were not enough. They needed blood. "What do you want to do?" "I want to end this." Adrian dismounted, helping Clara down. Get me a map of their position and gather every able-bodied fighter we have. We finish this tonight. Your Grace, you just rode for 3 days straight. You need rest. I need my lands to stop burning. Rest can wait. They set up a command center in the Great Hall, maps spread across tables that still bore the scars of hasty fortification. Adrian studied the raider positions with the cold focus that his father had beaten into him, seeing not just terrain but opportunity and risk calculated in lives and strategic advantage. Clara stood at his shoulder, silent but present, and when Adrian glanced at her, he saw that she was studying the maps too. Not with military precision, but with artist's eyes, seeing patterns and relationships that pure strategy might miss. They will expect you to defend, she said quietly, to fortify the castle and wait them out. Yes. So do the opposite. Attack while they think you are still traveling. Catch them before they are ready for a coordinated assault. That is risky. We would be leaving the castle vulnerable. The castle is already vulnerable. Clara pointed to the village locations on the map. But these people need to see that you will fight for them. That choosing truth over politics did not make you weak. It made you dangerous. Adrian looked at his wife and felt something shift in his chest. She was right. This was not just about military tactics. It was about proving that the man who had exposed traitors was the same man who would ride into fire to protect his people. You should stay here, he said. Clara's laugh was short and bitter. We are well past that conversation, Adrian. I am coming with you. This is actual combat. People are going to die. Then I will see what my choices cost. She met his eyes. You do not get to protect me from reality anymore. We are in this together, remember? Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the safest room in the castle and post guards. But he also knew that Clara had earned the right to face this beside him. She had walked through political warfare and social destruction without flinching. Physical warfare was just another battlefield. Fine. But you stay with the second wave. You do not engage directly unless absolutely necessary. Agreed. They rode out an hour before dawn when the world existed in that gray space between night and morning, where shadows still held power but light was building on the horizon. 70 fighters, a mix of trained guards and villagers who knew how to swing a sword or fire a bow. Not an army, but enough. The raiders had made camp in a clearing surrounded by dense forest, confident enough in their numbers that they had posted only minimal guards. Adrian watched from the tree line as men moved around cookfires, passing bottles and laughing with the casual ease of mercenaries who believed the job was already done. He felt rage building in his chest, hot and choking, the kind that demanded immediate violence. These men had killed his people, burned homes, terrorized families, and they were laughing about it. But rage was what his father would have felt. Rage was what would get his people killed in a poorly executed attack. So Adrian did what Clara had taught him. He let himself feel the anger fully, acknowledged it, then set it aside to be dealt with later. Right now, he needed cold calculation and precise execution. He gave the signal. They hit the camp from 3 sides simultaneously, the dawn attack turning from possibility to reality in seconds. The raiders scrambled for weapons, shouting orders, trying to form defensive lines, but Adrian's people were already among them. Adrian fought with the practiced deficiency of aristocratic training, his sword moving in patterns that had been drilled into him since childhood. Block, parry, strike. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Each action calculated to disable rather than kill when possible, because despite everything, he was not his father. He would not slaughter unnecessarily. But necessity had a way of redefining itself in combat. A raider came at him with a battle axe, the kind of wild, aggressive attack that left no room for restraint, and Adrian's sword found his throat almost on instinct. The man went down choking on his own blood, and Adrian moved past him without stopping because stopping meant dying, and he had promised Clara he would survive this. The battle lasted maybe 20 minutes, an eternity compressed into moments of violence and terror and the wet sounds of steel meeting flesh. When it ended, half the raiders were dead, the other half captured or fleeing into the woods. Adrian stood in the center of the camp, breathing hard, his sword dripping red, and felt absolutely nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just a vast empty awareness that violence had solved nothing except the immediate problem, and the real cost would come later when he tried to sleep and saw the faces of everyone who had died. Clara appeared at his side, her own face spattered with blood that Adrian hoped belonged to someone else. She had stayed with the second wave as promised, but second wave did not mean safe, and the haunted look in her eyes told him she had seen things that would scar her. "Is it over?" she asked. "This part is." Adrian sheathed his sword with hands that wanted to shake but did not, because control was the only thing holding him together. "The rest takes longer." They brought the captured raiders back to Blackthorn Castle in chains. 23 men who had killed for money and now faced execution or imprisonment depending on how much information they could provide. Adrian interrogated them himself, looking for confirmation of what he already knew. The third prisoner gave him names: Lord Ashford, Lord Pembroke, 3 other nobles who had pooled resources to hire mercenaries and attack while Adrian was at the assembly. A coordinated effort to destroy him through violence since politics had failed. Adrian sat in his study afterward, the confession document spread before him, and felt the weight of what came next settling on his shoulders like lead. He could take this to the king. Present evidence of conspiracy and attempted murder. Watch as more nobles were arrested and the northern territories descended into complete chaos. Or he could handle it quietly. Make the problem disappear in ways that would never see official channels. His father would have chosen the second option without hesitation. Would have had the conspirators killed, their deaths arranged to look like accidents, their families never knowing the truth. Adrian stared at the papers and felt the ghost of his father sitting beside him, whispering that power without ruthlessness was just weakness wearing a crown. He was still sitting there when Clara found him hours later, the sun beginning to set outside the windows. "You have not moved," she said softly. "I am trying to decide what kind of man I am." And I do not know anymore." Adrian looked up at her. "If I report this to the crown, the North tears itself apart. More people die. More families destroyed. But if I handle it quietly, the way my father would have, I become him. I become the thing I swore I would never be." Clara moved behind him, her hands settling on his shoulders. "Then maybe you find a third option." "There is no third option. There is always a third option. You just have to be brave enough to create it." Adrian leaned back into her touch, closing his eyes. "What would you do?" "I would tell the truth. Not to the crown, not publicly, but to the men who did this. I would confront them directly and give them a choice. Confess and face consequences, or force your hand and deal with whatever comes next. That is dangerous. If they refuse, if they decide to fight, then you deal with it. But at least you gave them the chance to choose honor. That is more than your father would have done." Adrian sat with that for a long moment, feeling the logic of it settle into place. It was risky. It was probably stupid, but it was also the only path that did not require him to become someone he could not live with. He stood. Decision made. Send messages to Ashford, Pembroke, and the others. Tell them I know what they did and I am giving them 1 week to come to Blackthorn and answer for it. After that, I take it to the crown. And if they do not come, then I have my answer about what kind of men they are. And I act accordingly. 5 of the 6 conspirators arrived within the week, their faces ranging from defiant to terrified. Only Lord Ashford stayed away, which told Adrian everything he needed to know about the man's character. They gathered in the great hall, these nobles who had tried to destroy him, and Adrian saw his father in every face. The same arrogance, the same certainty that power meant never having to answer for your actions. "You tried to kill me," Adrian said without preamble. "You hired raiders to burn my lands and murder my people because I refused to protect your treasonous friends." Lord Pembroke stepped forward, his face flushed. "You destroyed the Northern Alliance. You made us all look weak by airing private business to the crown. I exposed traitors. There is a difference. Your father's actions are not our responsibility." "No, but your response to them is..." Adrian moved closer. "You could have accepted that justice was served. Instead, you chose revenge. You chose to hurt innocent people to punish me for doing the right thing." "The right thing," Breton spat. "You have no idea what you have done. The northern territories are fractured. Trade agreements are falling apart. Families that have been allied for generations are at each other's throats. You created chaos and call it justice. I created truth." Adrian's voice went cold. "The chaos already existed. I just exposed it." "So what now?" Pembroke demanded. "You drag us before the king? Have us arrested like common criminals?" "No." Adrian surprised himself with the words even as he said them. I give you a choice. You each make full restitution to the families who lost people in your attack. You publicly apologize and acknowledge what you did, and you spend the next 5 years working to rebuild what your conspiracy destroyed. Do that, and I keep this between us." The hall went silent. "And if we refuse?" Breton asked. "Then I take everything I know to the Crown and let them decide your fate. But know this. I'm giving you more mercy than you gave those villagers who burned. More mercy than you deserve. This is extortion. This is justice tempered with pragmatism. You get to keep your lives and your titles, but you earn them back through action, not entitlement." One by one, the nobles agreed. Some reluctantly, some with barely concealed rage, but they agreed, because the alternative was prison or execution, and even aristocratic pride had its limits. When they left, Clara appeared from where she had been watching from the gallery. "That was either brilliant or incredibly naive," she said. "Probably both." Adrian felt exhausted down to his bones. "But it was the only choice I could live with. Your father would have killed them all." "Yes, which is why I did not." Clara came to stand beside him, looking out at the hall that had witnessed so much violence and compromise and painful growth. "Do you think they will actually do it? Make restitution? Work to rebuild?" "Some will not. But I gave them the chance. That is all I can do." She took his hand and they stood there in silence, two people who had survived more than either of them had thought possible. The weeks that followed were not easy. Restoration never was. The burned villages had to be rebuilt, which meant resources and time and the endless practical work of turning destruction back into livelihood. Adrian threw himself into it with the same intensity he had once reserved for maintaining emotional distance, and slowly, painfully, his lands began to heal. Clara painted again. Not in her small studio in the city, but in a light-filled room Adrian had converted for her in the east wing of the castle. She painted the burned villages as they were rebuilt, the families returning to homes that were new but built on old foundations, the slow transformation of trauma into survival, and eventually into something that might one day resemble peace. 6 months after the attack, Adrian stood in the village that had been hit hardest and watched as the last building was completed. A community hall, built with funds from the restitution payments and labor from villagers who refused to let destruction define them. The village elder, a woman named Margaret who had lost her husband in the raids, approached Adrian with an expression he could not quite read. "Your Grace," she said formally, "we wanted to thank you." "You do not need to thank me. If not for me, your husband would still be alive." Margaret's face tightened. "True. But if not for you, the men who hired his killers would still be planning their next attack. You gave us justice, and you gave us the means to rebuild. That counts for something. Does it feel like enough?" "No." Margaret's honesty was brutal. "My husband is still dead. The hole in my life is still there. But at least I know you tried. At least I know you care enough to ask whether it is enough instead of assuming your guilt is paid." Adrian felt those words settle into the place where he had been carrying his father's legacy like a stone around his neck. It would never feel like enough. The debt would never be fully paid. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the work was in carrying it without letting it crush you, in acknowledging the weight without using it as an excuse to stop trying. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling me the truth. That is what you gave us, Your Grace." Seemed only fair to return it. Adrian returned to the castle that evening to find Clara in her studio, working on something new. He watched from the doorway as she painted, her brush moving with the kind of focused intensity that meant she was chasing something just beyond articulation. "What are you working on?" he asked finally. Clara stepped back, studying the canvas. Blackthorn Castle. But not as it is. As it could be. Adrian moved closer to see. She had painted the castle with its walls partially removed, light pouring through openings that exposed the interior to the outside world. And in those openings, people. Not aristocrats in formal dress, but regular people. Families, children, artists. The castle transformed from fortress to sanctuary. "Is this wishful thinking or a suggestion?" he asked. "Both." Clara set down her brush. "You have been spending so much energy managing the territories and making restitution. But what about here? What about the castle itself? What about it? It is still a fortress, still a symbol of power and distance. What if you change that? Into what? into something that actually serves people instead of intimidating them. The idea took root in Adrian's mind with unexpected force. His father had built Blackthorn to project dominance. Every design choice had been calculated to inspire fear and reinforce hierarchy. What if Adrian did the opposite? Over the next several months, Blackthorn Castle underwent a transformation that shocked the Northern Territories. Adrian opened the East Wing to war widows and their children, providing housing and support while they rebuilt their lives. He converted the unused North Tower into a school where children from any background could learn reading and numbers and basic trade skills. Most controversially, he opened the galleries and gardens to public access twice a week, letting ordinary people walk through spaces that had been reserved for aristocracy since the castle was built. The nobles called him insane, said he was degrading the dignity of his position, that letting commoners wander his halls would lead to theft and disorder. Adrian did not care. Or rather, he cared about different things now. He cared about the children who had never seen art before standing in wonder before paintings. He cared about widows who had a safe place to grieve and rebuild. He cared about proving that power could be used for something other than domination. Clara watched it all with eyes that shone with something Adrian had finally learned to recognize as love. Not the overwhelming, consuming kind that destroyed people, but the steady, enduring kind that chose to stay even when things got difficult. One evening, nearly a year after the Winter Assembly, they stood together on the castle walls, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the grounds were filled with people. Families from the villages, children playing, artists sketching the light as it changed. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Giving up the power and distance? Choosing this over the way things were?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, really considering the question. A year ago, he would have said that power and distance were all he had, that they were the only things keeping him safe from a world that would hurt him if he let it close. But he had learned something in the months of rebuilding and opening the castle and watching his wife paint hope into existence with just canvas and pigment. Safety was not the same as living, protection was not the same as peace, and the walls he had built to keep pain out had also kept everything else out. Joy, connection, the possibility of becoming someone he did not hate. "No," he said finally. "I do not regret it. Some days I am terrified by it. Some days I miss the simplicity of just being cold and untouchable. But I would rather be terrified and alive than safe and dead inside." Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "You know what I realized yesterday?" "What?" "I was painting in this North Tower, and one of the children asked me to teach her, and I realized that this is what my mother wanted. Not for me to become famous or wealthy, but to pass on what she gave me, to help someone else see the world as beautiful, even when it is broken." "That sounds exactly right." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Do you think your father would recognize you now?" "No. And that is how I know I finally did something right." They stood together as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, the castle that had been a fortress of isolation slowly transformed into something stranger and more fragile. A place where power and vulnerability coexisted, where a duke who had forgotten how to feel learned to feel everything. Where truth mattered more than comfort and love was measured not in grand gestures but in daily choices to stay present even when it hurt. 2 years later, on a morning when early spring was just beginning to thaw the winter snow, Adrian found himself in the East Wing teaching a group of young men basic swordplay. Not because he wanted to create soldiers, but because some of them had asked to learn self-defense, and he was the only one available with the proper training. One of the students, a boy named Thomas, whose father had died in the raids, struggled with the footwork. Adrian spent extra time with him after the others left, adjusting his stance and explaining the principles of balance and leverage. "Why do you do this, Your Grace?" Thomas asked finally. "You are a duke. You could hire instructors." "I could." Adrian lowered his practice sword. "But then I would miss this." "Miss what?" "Miss watching you learn. Miss being useful in ways that matter. Misremembering that titles mean nothing if you are not actually helping people." Thomas considered this with the seriousness of youth. "My mother says you are different from other nobles, that you actually care. Your mother is generous." Adrian felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders. "I am trying to care. Some days I am better at it than others. That is all anyone can do, right? Try and keep trying even when it is hard." Yes. Adrian realized the boy had just articulated something he had been struggling to understand for 2 years. That is exactly what we do. That evening, Adrian and Clara hosted a small dinner. Not a formal aristocratic affair, but a gathering of people who had become important to them. Eliza and her new husband, Captain Morris and his family, Margaret from the village, and several of the artists who now used the castle galleries. The conversation was loud and chaotic and full of laughter, and Adrian sat at the head of the table feeling something he had not felt since childhood: contentment. The sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be, surrounded by people who saw him as human first and Duke second. After everyone left, Clara found him standing in the great hall, the same hall where he had confronted the conspirators and made the choice to be merciful instead of ruthless. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is to be happy." "Is it strange?" "For me, yes. I spent so long being miserable that happiness feels like I am doing something wrong, like any minute someone is going to take it away." Clara moved to stand in front of him, her hands on his chest. "Then let me tell you what I see. I see a man who was raised by a monster and chose to become something different. A man who had every excuse to be cruel and chose kindness instead. A man who opened his fortress and let the world in even though it terrified him. That is a generous interpretation. It is an honest one." Clara's voice was firm. "You are not perfect, Adrian. You still have days when you retreat into coldness because it feels safer. You still make decisions based on fear sometimes, but you keep trying. You keep choosing to be better. That is what matters." Adrian pulled her close, breathing in the scent of paint and determination that clung to her. "What did I do to deserve you? You let me laugh at you in your own ballroom and did not have me thrown out. Everything else followed from that. Best decision I ever made." They stood there in the hall that had witnessed so much transformation, two people who had survived destruction and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. And neither of them said anything because some things were too big for words. 5 years after that first winter assembly, Adrian received another summons from the king. This time, Clara came with him without question, and they traveled to the capital not as scandal, but as partnership. The throne room was full again, but the atmosphere was different, curious instead of hostile, interested instead of judging. "Duke Vale," the king began, "you have done something remarkable in the northern territories. I have tried, your majesty. You have succeeded." The king stood, moving down from the dais. 5 years ago, the north was fractured and unstable. Today, it is the most prosperous and unified region in the kingdom. Trade is flourishing, crime has decreased, and most remarkably, the gap between nobility and common people has narrowed more in your territories than anywhere else. I cannot take full credit for that, your majesty. It has been collaborative effort, but it started with you." The king looked at Clara. "And your duchess, who I am told has been instrumental in creating educational programs and supporting artists throughout the north. My wife sees possibilities where others see only problems," Adrian said. "I just try to keep up." The king smiled. "I am hereby removing all remaining oversight. You have more than proven your fitness to lead. Furthermore, I am appointing you as my personal advisor on territorial reform. If what you have accomplished in the north can be replicated elsewhere, we could transform the entire kingdom." Adrian felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Not crushing this time, but substantial, meaningful, a responsibility he had earned rather than inherited. "Thank you, your majesty. I am honored. Do not thank me yet. This means more work, more scrutiny, more people trying to undermine you because they fear change. I am familiar with that experience, your majesty. I imagine you are." They returned to Blackthorn a week later to find the castle grounds filled with people celebrating the news. Somehow word had spread faster than their carriage could travel, and now the villagers and families and students and artists had gathered to mark the moment. Adrian stood on the castle steps looking at the crowd. These people who had become his purpose and his anchor, and felt Clara's hand slip into his. "You have to say something," she whispered. "What do I say?" "The truth." "You are good at that now." Adrian stepped forward and the crowd quieted. He looked at their faces, recognizing so many of them. Thomas, now 15 and training to be a swordsman. Margaret, who had remarried and started a bakery. The children from the school. The artists from the galleries. The families living in what had once been the exclusive East Wing. 5 years ago, Adrian began, his voice carrying across the grounds. I stood in this castle and felt nothing. I had convinced myself that feeling nothing was strength, that isolation was power, that being feared was the same as being respected. He paused, finding Clara in the crowd, even though she stood right beside him. I was wrong about all of it. Real strength is choosing vulnerability. Real power is using what you have to lift others up. And real respect comes from being human enough to admit when you fail and brave enough to keep trying anyway. The crowd was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. So I want to thank you, all of you, for teaching me how to live instead of just exist, for showing me that a castle can be a home instead of a fortress, for proving that when you tear down walls, what you build in their place can be stronger than stone. He looked at Clara, and in her eyes he saw reflected back everything they had survived, every battle, every choice, every moment of choosing truth over comfort and love over fear. 5 years ago, I forgot how to feel. Today, I feel everything, and it is terrifying and overwhelming and absolutely worth it. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Adrian let himself feel it. The joy, the connection, the sense of belonging that he had spent decades believing was impossible for someone like him. That night, after the celebration died down and the castle grew quiet, Adrian and Clara walked through the galleries where her paintings hung alongside pieces from other artists. They stopped in front of the landscape she had reclaimed that first night. The forest path dappled with autumn light, her mother's last beautiful thing before the world turned ugly. Do you think she would be proud of you? Adrian asked. Clara studied the painting, her head tilted. I think she would be surprised by all of it. But yes, she would be proud that I found someone who chose to grow instead of staying frozen. I think my mother would be proud too. Adrian surprised himself with the admission. She died when I was young, but she was kind. She used to tell me that kindness was the hardest kind of courage. I did not understand what she meant until I met you. Your father really did a number on you, did not he? Yes. But he does not get to define me anymore. I get to define myself. They stood together in front of the painting that had started everything, and Adrian realized that the story was not really about a duke who forgot how to feel. It was about what happened when someone had the courage to remember. The painful, beautiful, terrifying work of becoming human again after spending years as stone. 10 years after Clara had crashed his party and demanded back a stolen painting, Adrian stood on the same castle walls where he had once watched the sunset and felt nothing. Now he watched children playing in the gardens below, artists setting up easels to catch the evening light, families gathering for a community dinner in the great hall that had once been reserved for aristocratic banquets. Clara appeared beside him, older now, laugh lines deepening around her eyes, paint still perpetually staining her hands. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The way things were before? Adrian considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of not caring, the ease of making decisions without considering how they affect hundreds of people. But would I trade this for that? He looked down at the life they had built from the ruins of his father's legacy and his own emotional destruction. Never. This is messy and complicated and exhausting, but it is real. And I would rather be exhausted from living than comfortable from hiding. That is good, because I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Clara took his hand, and he felt the calluses from years of holding paintbrushes, the strength from years of standing beside him through everything. Promise. You're stuck with me, Your Grace. Just Adrian, always just Adrian with you. Just Adrian, then, who forgot how to feel and learned to remember, who turned a fortress into a home, who proved that choosing truth costs everything and is worth every penny. They stood together as the sun set over lands that had been burned and rebuilt, over a castle that had been a symbol of isolation and became a sanctuary, over a life that had been constructed from stone and fear and was now built from vulnerability and choice and the daily courage of trying to be better than your worst inheritance. Somewhere below, someone started playing music. Laughter drifted up on the evening air. The smell of dinner cooking, the sounds of life being lived fully and messily and without apology. Adrian closed his eyes and let himself feel all of it. The joy and the pain and the overwhelming gratitude for the woman who had looked at him when he was frozen solid and decided he was worth thawing. Who had stayed when he gave her every reason to leave. Who had taught him that the opposite of numbness was not just feeling, but choosing to feel even when it hurt. And in that moment, standing on the walls of a castle that had finally become a home, Duke Adrian Vale understood something his father never had. That power without humanity was just violence and expensive clothes. That walls built to keep others out also trapped you inside. That the bravest thing you could do was not to become invulnerable, but to risk being destroyed by caring too much. That love was not weakness dressed up as feeling, but strength that chose connection over safety every single time. And that the greatest treasure he had ever given away was not his loneliness or his title or his carefully constructed armor, but his willingness to be wounded, to let someone close enough to hurt him, to trust that being known completely was worth the risk of being left behind. The castle had finally become a home. Not because the walls were different, but because the man inside them had learned to live instead of just survive. And that made all the difference.